This video is meant to be an explainer and or introduction, if you weren't in class today, for the response paper on Richard III. This is response paper number 4, and I would like it, if at all possible, by November the 5th. If you need more time, as always, just let me know. So this response paper asks you to choose a scene or two from Richard III, Acts 3 through 5, and to adapt it for performance. We talked a bit in class today about the Rose Theater, and I'll pull up an image of that in just a moment to use along with you. You can set the production, however, like wherever you'd like. It can be on stage, it can be, in your high school auditorium, it could be at MTSU's theater, it could be a film production. It's up to you whether it is a stage or a film production. You can also set the production whenever you wish. You can set the production in the medieval period, which is when the history took place, or the Renaissance period. You can set the production in the 20th century. You can set it today. You can set it at a high school. You can do whatever you'd like. Mike Liu's Teenage Dick is an adaptation that is set in a high school, just for example. If your chosen scene is short, for example, Act 3, Scene 3, you might want to combine it with a partner scene, or if your scene is quite long, you can cut it. You're aiming for around 100, 125 lines. It doesn't have to be quite that long. If you feel like you can do a lot of work in fewer lines, that's fine. I do want you to stick with Shakespeare's text rather than wholly modernizing the English. Modernization takes a lot of time and a lot of research. And so if you would like to clarify some things, that's okay. But I would advise you not to wholly modernize your scene. We talked a little about regarding staging of the play in class today, which is the 13th of October, but I'm going to talk more about it in this video. You can also feel free to watch other adaptations and get a feel for how other people approach these scenes, but do your own interpretation, right? Show me what you see, what you imagine as you're reading this play. You can cast your scene with modern actresses and actresses, or you might make a historical cast of dream actors. You can also just use friends and relatives as long as you include brief descriptions of them. You should direct your actors, including stage directions, as well as notes on tone, response, facial expressions, etc. And finally, write a note to me about why you chose the scene you did, what you hope to accomplish, and which productions influenced you. And if you want, you can talk about the play as a whole. So to illustrate this, I'm going to begin in Act 1, Scene 2, which is the courtship scene that we talked about, the wooing of Lady Anne. So we talked about how wild this scene is, right? And how Anne goes from mourning over the body of her dead father-in-law and cursing Richard to taking his ring at the end of the scene. This is a wild change, and several of you indicated that this scene was a bit confusing for you. I would wager that it's confusing for most people who don't see it happen. And maybe even for people who do see it happen. Anne's decision, her turn, her change of character, or change of opinion, if not change of character, seems really rash. And so this is where I want to talk about it. So there are some things about Shakespeare in general and early modern plays in general that I haven't had a chance to hit on yet in class because our time is so short. So I'm going to do some of that here. You will notice, and I'm just going to highlight this briefly for you, that there aren't a lot of stage directions. And in this particular edition of the play, there are stage directions in brackets. These stage directions in brackets, she points to the corpse, they set down the bier, etc., were not part of the text from which this edition is made. These are stage directions that the editors of Richard III have put in so that you can read the play more fluidly. Often, these stage directions have been included in previous editions of the play by other editors, but they did not show up in either the quarto or the folio editions of Richard III. Indeed, there are very few stage directions in Shakespeare's plays or in other early modern plays. Um, Instead, what we have are some implied stage directions, and I will talk to you about those as we go through the play, this scene. Okay, so let's just look at the first 6 lines. Anne says, set down your honorable load, if honor may be shrouded in a hearse, whilst I a while obsequiously lament the untimely fall of virtuous Lancaster. Poor key-cold figure of a king, pale ashes of the house of Lancaster, thou bloodless remnant of that royal blood, etc. So she's talking pretty explicitly in these lines, to the corpse of Henry VI, okay? And then here, she's pretty obviously talking to some other people, right? So she's talking to these halberds who are guarding it here. So there needs to be something that happens between those two statements, right? She's asked them to set it down, and then she speaks to Henry VI's body. Therefore, we can assume that the people who are carrying the hearse or moving the hearse set it down, okay? And that's why that stage direction makes sense. We can also assume other stage directions based on the dialogue of the scene. Anne continues, lo, in these windows that let forth thy life, I pour the helpless balm of my poor eyes. Okay? Here Anne is crying. Or she makes motions that indicate that she has been crying or will be crying or something similar. Next, she says, oh, cursed be the hand that made these holes. Curse the heart that had the heart to do it. Curse the blood that let this blood from thence more direful hap betide that hated wretch that makes us wretched by the death of thee than I can wish to wolves, to spiders, toads, or any creeping venomed thing that lives, right? So this is the section that I just read out loud. And this oh, right? This curse, right? Is a really different tone than the speech that came just before it, right? So the director of this scene might tell Anne to look up away from the body or to gesture toward the holes as she talks about them, and then to move, in other ways that indicate both her rage and her sorrow, right? She was mostly sad in the lines before, right? Poor key cold figure of a king, this balm of my eyes, and then, oh, cursed to be the hand that made these holes, right? If I were directing this scene throughout this, I would ask, sorry, not quite that long. Let me redraw my arrow. Throughout this part, I would ask my actress to speak gradually more quickly, right? So accelerate in the delivery of the lines. Again, to show her rage, to show her emotion, sort of taking over the meter of the lines. This part where Richard and Anne go back and forth, right, is a little bit difficult to follow in some ways, and you can sort of clear that up with your stage direction. It's also possible to make the conflict between these characters come out more clearly. Okay, and so let me see what I can do about finding a good place to talk about this. All right, so here I'm on page 27 of the folder edition. I'm gonna start with let's see, Richard in line 93, 94, saying, "Say that I slew them not." Okay, so if I were directing this scene, I would have Richard sort of impose that upon her, like, say that I slew them not, like don't say that about me. Say that I slew them not. and be sort of flippant, right? Then say they were not slain, but dead they are, and devilish slave by thee, right? And I would have Anne, let's see, I'll do Richard in pink and Anne in green. I would have Anne point to Richard there. Um, and then in this Richard section, I would have him say on I did not kill your husband, right? I would have him emphasize that I. So I'm going to make that super dark. I did not kill your husband. And I would also have him sort of gesture toward himself, right? And so I would write that down. Um, and then Anne again, very flippant, very cold. Why then? He's alive, right? With like a look of surprise on her face that turns to a scowl. Um, then Richard is earnest at this point. Nay, he is dead and slain by Edward's hands. And then Anne again, in thy foul throat thou liest, right? Um, then gesturing away toward Queen Margaret, saw thy murderous falchion smoking in his blood, the which thou didst what thou once didst bend against her breast, but that thy brothers beat aside the point. Um, and then Richard might show some anger here in this line. I was provoked by her slanderous tongue that laid their guilt upon my guiltless shoulders. And then, they go on from there. So these are sort of implied by the relationship between the characters. You might mark in the text, here I'll zoom in. If you can do this with a pen and pencil, right? You don't have to have um, like an app to do it with on this, but I'm recording it this way so that you can see it better. So in Anne's line, in thou foul throat thou liest, right? Um, this isn't um, this line is metrically correct. Richard III is one of the most metrically regular plays of Shakespeare's career. But I would want the actress to emphasize foul and throat and liest. Okay. In thy foul throat thou liest, Queen Margaret saw, right? If we do iambic pentameter over the top of this, right? I'll do it in blue. In thy foul throat thou liest, Queen Margaret saw, right? But that would put in thy foul throat thou liest, right? But I want the emphasis on foul. So I need to put that in with my underlining there. This is an example of the kind of thing that I'd like to see you doing, like emphasizing certain words, telling your actors how to gesture, where to look, things like that.